Let's do that. All right. Okay, we're happening.
Yay!
Hi.
Hi.
So before we get into all the things we were just about to get into before hitting record, just tell me and everyone about you, because you're not huge on social media. You're not a big
I
voice
do
on.
not like social media at all.
Yeah, you're not like somebody who's outspoken. And in fact, the other day I saw you just say something about Facebook being a cesspool or something, and I was like, that girl, that's right.
How I feel. Yep. Yep.
But tell us about you.
Yeah. So, wow. Well, I live in California. I'm a California native, and I am a women's holistic chiropractor. I've been practicing since 1998. Um, I'm very unusual. Like, I'm unconventional, maybe is the way to put it, and always operated, yeah, right on the edge of where things, and that continues. And I'm very happy to be here with you. If you
Cool.
want to know more about specific stuff, you can ask.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the reason I really like talking to you is because we both do the same two kinds of pelvic work. And that's kind of unusual. I don't think I've met anyone else who does the similar pelvic work in terms of doing holistic pelvic care, like Tammy style, and then also doing sexological bodywork / somatic sex education. And then you also have a background in holistic medicine like I do. And so we have like a lot of overlap, and there's
Yeah.
always a lot of really good conversation. And I think we were talking about recently, and this is what, I mean, actually, we've been talking about a lot of stuff recently, haven't we? But one of the things that I think is really important to talk about is the way that what's happening in the world right now shows up in our bodies. No matter what kind of skin we're in, it's affecting us. And fairly recently, I have had some clients who identify as both white and something else that might not be quite white, but they're kind of having this in-between struggle. And I think a lot of it has to do with what's happening in the world right now. And there's a lot of body shame that's coming up for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, have you gone back to hands-on practice?
Just finally next week, I'm getting out of quarantine and into interactive sessions again. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Good.
Yeah.
So you might start seeing this too.
Yeah.
It's a big deal because when we start to even subconsciously internalize things that make us feel shame about our bodies, that's where I draw the line. And I'm seeing a lot of that in the world today. You know, when we kind of put ourselves in these spaces that tell us we're, innately bad for being one thing or another, it starts to internalize and things start to get yucky and icky, and we start to actually dissociate from ourselves. So can you speak a little bit to that? I know you can't.
I can. Well, I love what you're saying, because as I'm watching all that's playing out in a very loud manner, and really, I see, aside from just sort of gripping all of us, like compelling us to be sucked into our screens and news cycles, and what's, like on the edge of our seat, like, oh, and sort of all this emotional, either outward turmoil or internal emotional stuff. The one thing that's been in my mind is like, where is the place where we get to really honestly address our internalized either guilt, like for example, let's say it's white guilt, which is a thing that's actually being encouraged right now. Where do we get to address that internalization of white guilt? Sorry, I have a little gnat here. Or or internalized racism. Like this is something that, like 30 years ago when I was in college, it was like the thing, it's like, okay, we can talk about homophobia. And thankfully we've culturally moved through a lot of hurdles into having more acceptance for queer people. But back in the day, like 30 years ago, we were talking about homophobia and, but where do we deal with internalized homophobia or internalized racism or internalized white guilt? And the place where we address that is not through name calling and projecting on people and saying there's, you're guilty or you're oppressed. It happens in the body. And so we can address our own levels of internalized self-hate, whether it's body hate or on whatever level of our so-called identity, that happens in the body. It doesn't happen in these conversations where we're like smacking each other down on social media.
Yeah.
So that's where, like, you and I doing what we do, we really have the power to impact someone and give them tools to like feel safe in their body and accept who they are. And like, where is that conversation happening?
Yeah. And and I'm seeing a lot, and I really respect this too, of people talking about how to deal with being in a white body or et cetera. And then, like working on their internalized racism, which I think is a beautiful conversation. I really do. I also think it needs to be balanced with a conversation of self-acceptance and using the body that you're in, the skin that you're in, to balance that system, to actually, like, where's the conversation around, this is going to sound, so spiritual bypassing, but what was the conversation around loving yourself and loving each other? And I'm hoping that we can kind of counterbalance what's happening right now and eventually come back to, because the pendulum swings, it goes from one side to the other. And I'm really hoping that we can come back to a middle ground sometime soon and, just really try to address that part, because it's really missing in the conversation. And I had an unfortunate incident, as you witnessed a couple days ago, with a group of white women who came after me for mentioning Karen. And I said that Karen is a innately sexist term. And actually, it's because the beginning of Karen was started on Reddit by a white male. And he was talking about Karens, quote unquote, being women who are annoying. So it was applied to all women. It was like an annoying woman theme. And at some point I was I was getting attacked for not acknowledging the now racism centered discussion of quote Karen. And I was like, well, but that's not how it began. And also, when did racism trump sexism?
Right. In this moment it does.
Yeah, well, but it's and that's understandable, and we can go in and look at those things and parse them apart, but we can't deny that there are other things at play in all of these conversations. And my discussion is really centered on women in general, and so I really wanted to talk about how we see this show up in our bodies, because I think if we're going to start dividing ourselves as women, then that's where I start seeing some red flags.
Well, and even using the term woman or women is now a controversial thing, as you know, in doing the work that we do. And so I've magically managed in my practice, and I don't quite know how I've done this, to sidestep the issue, like even calling myself a women's health holistic whatever chiropractor triggers some people. And in some of our circles that are very, very progressive and awesome, amazing people that want to be like on the cutting edge of change in the world. But I still use the term women's health, and it feels appropriate and actually like naming the thing that I do. And I actually have had a trans man with female anatomy come to see me because we were in resonance, and I knew we would have a rapport and be able to create a healing environment together for what they were working through. But yeah, I mean, it's a whole other conversation, you know, on the
Yeah.
thing with like, can we even use the term woman or women's health anymore without sort of being attacked and skewered and hurting someone's feelings or having someone come after us. It would be so nice if we could lift people up and focus. Like, I would just like to see more of a focus on what we're creating instead of what we're trying to tear down.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Build health, like for whatever kind of body you're in, whatever skin you're in. Let's build health for our communities, and let's build pride in, you know, in our traditions, in our ancestry, in like the beauty that we've received from the people that came before us, whatever our culture is or our ethnicity. Why is the conversation not more on that instead of just like, you know, like kind of trying to like shoot down everyone else that's different? I don't understand that.
Well, and I think too, I think that there is something to be said for shooting things down and having the upheaval of anger. Anger has to happen before any healing can occur. But I think it's really interesting to watch a society start to manifest itself around anger and not like using that anger to push forward. And so I've been feeling like a lot of like energetic pushback and feeling like, okay, so we're here now. Okay, so if I navigate it in this way, then I'm wrong. If I navigate it in that way, I'm wrong. You know, and so there's a lot, and I know there's a lot of people right now who feel very trapped in, and especially if they present as white, and especially if they are mixed race. I mean, that's like a very, it's very strong right now. And also if they present as Black or BIPOC, but they are conservative. And so there's like a whole lot of upheaval right now. And I'm seeing a lot of this presentation come up in people's bodies. You know, people will come in, they want to heal miscarriages, or they want to heal, you know, anything that's going on inside their bodies that we've been working on. And then yet what comes up is, who am I in this body? Who am I? And you know, how do I come to terms with presenting in one way and feeling another way?
Yeah.
It's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
So I guess in terms of how we can come to that unity, I think, I mean, my understanding is that we can intellectualize and then we can somaticize.
Right.
Which is great, because I've been seeing a lot of really great conversations in the somatic community about working on your innate, you know, racism, your like the systemic stuff that is now getting pulled up out of the dirt. That's all beautiful. I also think that, you know, like, and I also, my opinion is that we over intellectualize a lot where we could, and in fact, be more in our bodies. And, you know, I think social media is a really terrible place to try to somaticize.
Oh gosh, I'm a total fail right now. Like, I was really off of all social for several years, like maybe 2 or 3 years. And then as things started heating up, I was like, oh, I gotta like get my digital warrioress on, and started going back in there. And honestly, it is just, it's brutal. And
it's brutal.
It's really, yeah, like our bodies are pharmacies. And I've just noticed the chemistry that my body produces when I'm looking at a lot of intense like images, you know, violence and hateful kinds of outrage. It's really hard, you know, or even the grief. is hard to sit with and kind of digest it in a body way. It's a lot.
Yeah. And I think too, the more that we're steeped in this weird thing that is 2020, the more disconnected we start to feel because we're investing ourselves in these conversations and images that feel really bad to our bodies.
Yeah.
And I think we start to check out of what it feels like, because we're so used to seeing all these really intense images and hearing all of these like intense things getting thrown around, and and then we start to kind of buy into and believe on some level that we need that. And it becomes really toxic. So right now there's a lot of sludge going on, and I feel like I got hit with some sludge this week, and I was like, whoa, okay, so this is what's happening. And when we put ourselves in a position where we're like speaking about how we feel, we have to check first with how we show up in the world before we make mention of those things. And yes, that's a thing, but then also, where do we draw the line about what we can or cannot say? How is my opinion or how I feel in my body any less important than anyone else's at this moment? And I understand there's, we're at this weird tip.
We are. Well, and that's the other thing, and hopefully this doesn't sound too crazy or political, but I truly feel like the most revolutionary thing that any human can do right now is to reclaim the territory of their body and their mind. Yes. And the tools that we have from our somatic education it's breath, it's placement of attention, it's movement, sound, and touch. So we can learn to self-regulate and use those tools so that we can handle the social media wars or whatever else is happening in our lives, and actually be able to function through it. And so it's really the most empowering thing that we have. And anger is great because it creates a boundary, but like I know for myself, like I have to get sort of like pissed enough at how much my embodied reality is getting hijacked by the world, because I'm allowing that to happen, and I have to seize the power of my own attention and bring it back to like, okay, like let's get into functionality myself and regulate so I can actually be useful in this world and do some good and contribute, which is what I want to do. Yeah. So I think it's like that's where the revolution is. And so I mean, I'm glad we can talk about that and also contribute to people skill building and being able to do that, because whatever those things are that are so dear to our hearts, whatever cause it might be, maybe it is like BLM, or maybe it is transgender rights, or like feminism or pro-womanness, whatever. I don't like using the term feminism, but like support for women in the world, for the female experience here, whatever those things are. We can't be that useful if we're not functional in our own body and mind.
Yeah. And I think that really comes with like being present to what is, what your purpose is, and whether or not, having a certain conversation is overly self-serving, or like if we're going to put ourselves in a certain position, we have to understand what that's for and like be clear about that. And to do that, we have to check into our bodies and make sure that we're not having reactions like, as though we're being, totally ego-centered. Because if it's about you and it's about like you know, your agenda in the world, how does that relate to what you're actually working towards? So, and I think checking into the body actually helps with all of that. So yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah, that's the revolution I want to be part of.
Yeah. Also wanted to talk a little
not popular, it's not like very hip.
bit. I also wanted to talk a little bit about your history with feminism, if you're willing, because you said that you have a women's studies degree.
Yeah. I went to a really liberal, like Hollywood elite high school, private high school with movie star kids. We got scholarships and went there, both my sister and I. And then I went originally to Oberlin College in Ohio, North Central Ohio, a private college. I was so happy and proud to go to that school because it was the first school in the US to admit African Americans and the first school to admit women. It had a very, very liberal and progressive, like it was like amazing to be a part of that. So I went there for 2 years, and then I transferred back to University of California at Santa Cruz and finished up with a women's studies degree there. And so I was only actually there for a year and a half at UC before, because I finished early. I was able to kind of do the fast track. And incredible, inspiring professors, really distinguished. And I can say that what I learned there was that, like the summation of what I learned there was that sexism, it was like race, class, gender, and sexuality that's what the conversation was about then in relation to sexism. So there was like sexism was the foundation that we were learning about, that there's systemic sexism, and pretty much every single class that I took was what would point out, the point of the class would be to point out how women were systemically oppressed by the patriarchy. That was the summation of the conversation. And then it was like in relation to race, class, gender, and sexuality. So there were conversations about homophobia, racism, classism, etc. So that was what was going on in the early 90s when I was in school. I can say for myself, it was a time where I was the most angry and ragey. I really learned to be very angry and ragey. And there was this like, general idea was if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention to what's going on. That would be like the bumper sticker version of what school was about. And I'm very grateful that I knew I wanted to be in natural health.
Say that one again. You just
that to go to that actually got. Oh, did I blip?
Yeah, we missed it.
Yeah. Sorry, I think maybe it's a cell signal or a signal.
That's okay.
So I'm really glad that I had a direction at the end of that undergrad education, because I knew I was going to chiropractic school. I knew I was going to be in natural health, and to me that was something I really wanted to be a part of, because I felt really like I was so angry. I would walk down the street and I just had this like murderous rage. I would see someone, eating meat, and I thought they were evil. Like they were just like ruining the environment and the world, and they were so cruel. They would be on, styrofoam. They were using styrofoam. They were ruining the environment. It was like I was triggered about everything. And so what's interesting to me is now, like however many years, like 30 years later, or whatever it is, 25, 30 years later, I look now and I see it's kind of like where I was, and they just turned the volume up and kind of added in some new flavors, like the transgender flavor to be upset about, and all, you know, all the other layers of it.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, I know what you guys are dealing with. Like, I was there. And it's this sort of like attacky, like you just want to like tear everyone to shreds, tear everything to shreds, because it's also wrong. And yeah.
Yeah.
So, feminism, that was my experience with feminism. It was a lot of just learning a lot of anger, and putting on a certain set of glasses, so that all of my perceptions were filtered through a certain set of glasses. And really, when you put on a set of glasses, you do start to see everything through those lenses. And it's very refreshing to get counterpoints and other perspectives. Yeah, very, very refreshing.
Yeah. And I would, say to anybody who's listening right now, because we're in such a really intense environment, that, if you even mildly swing to the left, then you're sucked into this extreme version of that right now. And that can be, oops, did I lose you? No, you're there. Okay. And that can be really, intense for our bodies. And it can, and, we have to find a little bit of a balance, and we have to kind of step out of that, step away from those glasses, take them off once in a while, to see that the people around you, are not necessarily stupid and in need of education. Perhaps they have had other life experiences that, you can't speak to, which is exactly what people are trying to, push around right now. Is like, well, you can't speak to this experience because you're not XYZ. And it's like, well, yeah, but like, you also need to remove those glasses to see that everyone around you is just as valid and has just as valid an opinion, has had different life experiences, and those are valid too. And, I think, it gets hairy. It gets really hairy. And when we talk about feminism too, I think it's really interesting, because feminism right now has become very intersectional. And I'm sure you saw the start of that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different sects of feminists out there. Sects, SECT, not sex.
What? No.
There are different sects of
Yes.
feminists
Yes.
out there, and they're all infighting. And there's a lot of anger being flung up and around. So it's really important, I think, to continue to be present to what that anger is about, for you personally. And it is always personal. And I think that having watched, like it's really interesting that you got to watch, because I remember in the 90s, like things were way different. They're like everything, like socially way different. And I was a kid, but still socially, I just remember things being so different than they are now. And that's wonderful. But we still have to. And it sounds like you came back from that pendulum swing, and now you're kind of like centering yourself a little bit, as far as what I see you posting and talking about. And you're trying to seek clarity for yourself, just as everyone else is.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because I don't love the term feminist anymore. Like, I used to identify with that term. And now I'm not that proud of my feminist past, because it felt, now from where I am now, and I think just with more life experience, it felt very narrow-minded. And I feel like the best way for me to be a feminist is just to be myself. It's like literally like being a strong woman, and a strong, grounded woman is kind of I think the best way I can promote more of a world that respects and honors women and the feminine principle, or whatever you want to, however you want to say it. So yeah. And also I think through choosing to work specifically with women and female bodies is another way to kind of lift us up.
Yeah. And too, I said this to a client the other day, the female body is a portal. The female body is a portal between life and death. The veil is very thin. It's like Halloween down there all the time.
Mhm.
My witchy people will understand what the hell I'm talking about. Like the veil is very thin. It's when we also have, I've noticed a really interesting potential to swing on that pendulum swing and to like really get involved and impassioned. And I think that has a lot to do with the feminine form, because it is like a passionate, like there's a lot of yin and intensity to the feminine form, and it's very passionate. So as people who identify as feminists or have like feminist background, like you could feel that. And I see, especially right now with all this like gender fluidity stuff rolling around, there's a lot of play with that. And so now like society is like accepting playtime with what it means to be in gender form. And I think it's really powerful, but also can be really poisonous if if we're in it too long and too hard.
Yeah, it looks very confusing, for a lot of folks,
Yeah.
if you're following what's happening in that, yeah, especially, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, what time is it? Oh, okay. Got a little bit more time left. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about your favorite aspects of doing pelvic care. What is it that you enjoy doing the most? Because
Yeah.
um, the things that I expected before I became a pelvic care provider to appreciate about it are not what happened, basically.
Yeah, I would say there's so many things I love about it, but one of the most exciting things is to just have have people get off the table having experienced like a new dimension of their body and a new appreciation where it's like it's kind of like things click on so many levels inside of them that they're awed by their own bodies and their own ability to hear their body, like actually listen to their bodies. That's one of the most amazing things to track with women, is just their like awe and wonder of their own bodies and like the newfound acceptance, appreciation, whether it's a new mom that's healing kind of in her pelvic healing process after either a C-section or a vaginal delivery, or whether it's someone who's been dealing with pelvic pain issues for a while and they felt really locked out and disconnected. They're just like, wow, I didn't know I could connect with this part of my body and hear what it had to tell me, because they get messages, they see things, they sense, they have all these experiences, and I just work because I never know what's going to happen. And it's always this mystery, it's like magical what arises. So that's what I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's so rewarding to be a part of that process.
Yeah. I think, and this kind of circles back around to what we were talking about before. I think that one of the most interesting things that I've found in my own body and in the bodies of other women while working with women is that anger is it's very present. And a lot of us are not taught that we can be angry, or that we can display anger appropriately. And so we bury that anger in our bodies and it becomes something else, something a lot more sinister and grief-ridden. And I think that what I really enjoy is when people can really feel into anger and express anger appropriately. Yeah.
So good for setting boundaries too. Like that is the beauty of anger, is it's like if you really contact that, it is gonna like make your force field. It's like don't fuck with me. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really that, and that is, it's really powerful to be in touch with that and to not be at the effect of it, but to kind of use it in the way that it can serve us truly. That's awesome that you are helping people kind of get access to the power of that.
Yeah, and there's definitely a difference between female anger and male anger. Have you noticed that? Like, there's definitely a difference.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, what I observe out in the world is it seems like, without getting into stereotyping, it seems like there is more, it's a little more common for there to be acceptance of anger in male bodies and a little less acceptance in female bodies, or we kind of tiptoe around it a little bit. But yeah, I'm curious what your observations are on that.
It seems so, and I've done some group work with not just women. And I think that when I'm in a space with a woman and she's going through a period of anger, there's always this moment when anger morphs into kind of like how can I describe this? Like an internalized sense of shame about being and existing in the world. Versus when I've seen men get angry, because I've done some somatic work on men, it usually ends up being something that is more like, okay, a man is angry, and then there's like a linear, it could go inwards and become about sense of self, but it's more about like sense of presentation. Like how one presents in the world, like instead of what one is. Like for me, I've noticed a difference between like what one is versus how one presents and is taken in the world. So it's like I've noticed that little itty bitty difference between, and I wonder if a lot of that is social in nature. Like if it's something that we're socialized to feel. Women are like, well, because we, as women, we're always like, well, who am I? Like, what is my benefit to like, because we get these mixed messages forever and ever, and we're stuck in our 30s and 40s and trying to figure out, what our benefit is, or like, if we're enough. I mean, it takes us that many fucking years to get to a point where I'm like, oh, I can be enough, and then we have to internalize that message. So I think that, and I'm sure with men, there's plenty of overlap. But there's definitely that initial retraction versus like, I can't express anger, versus a man to express anger is like up and out, like, yeah, I can express anger.
Yeah. I wonder, do you think it's like partially just like a yin yang thing? Since you're,
absolutely.
I'm not a like yin yang expert. I would leave that to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's some of that just like kind of just like the directionality of yang versus the kind of, sort of, I mean, I wonder if that's maybe part of how it plays out too.
Absolutely. And, everyone has yin and yang aspects to them. And we, in a female body, you have more yin, and in a male body, you have more yang naturally. And so you're going to have like an interplay of those things, and they're going to be rolling in and out of each other all the time. So you can find yin inside yang forever and ever. It's kind of like, I was a few weeks ago watched this documentary on Netflix. It was like, the end of the world, will it end in fire or ice, or something like that? Because I'm a big dork. I was like, yeah, fire or ice. And basically the premise is that it won't end in either, because they both exist forever in potential together. And that is yin and yang. They both exist forever in potential together. You can't have one without the other. And so we, with our brains, cannot actually take them apart. And we will never be able to take them apart. We will die being a complicated amassment of like internal, external. But, when we come into this world, we come in with a specific presentation of internal or external, which is male, female. And this is why I have a little bit of an issue with this whole discussion about, I don't have an issue with people identifying their gender, fluidity. I think I have more of an issue with the concepts that sex is non-binary, because it's not in nature. It is a binary structure. Gender, sure, whatever. I mean, I'm all for like gender, fuck it. Like I could give two shits
I
about
know,
it. Like,
have at it. Like, just,
yeah, like have at it. But
I mean, be you, you know?
right, exactly. But when it comes to like the way our bodies show up, we are born into a one or another dimension. And we, you know, it's always so interesting. It's a blessing to have one or another to bring into the world. And then you get to play with that. And that's what's really cool about it. So yeah. Anyway, but anger shows up more yin and more yang with different bodies. Go ahead. Did you have something to say?
I was going to ask you a question because that just like sparked something for me.
Please do.
About, let's see if I can track it back. So one thing that I've also noticed in the last, because I've got some, I don't know how many years, I got some years on you. So I've been like watching things a slightly longer, without aging myself, is so like I've noticed just in watching people's bodies over the years, and I think some of this has to do with our like being less physically active, more involved with technology, you know, not having physical education in school. Like we've kind of shifted our focus into like projecting all of our attention out into a screen and into technology instead of like back into like using our moving parts in our body. But I've noticed just the shape, like the actual shapes of bodies. It sparked me when you said that females have more yin in their bodies and males have more yang in their bodies, like in their actual, I'm assuming this is like the actual structure of the body or how our bodies come into form. But I've noticed almost I've noticed male bodies having less masculine traits, and female body, and not just the bodies, but also like the personalities. I've noticed really a shift, and I'm just like, what would Chinese medicine say about that? Because to me, it seems like we're not, in terms of being like clearly differentiated, where you kind of know what is more yin or more yang. It seems like we're almost like reversing or moving to the point where we're
moving to the middle.
We're moving to the middle, but it's almost like where I see, like, even in personality wise, I see a lot of women that have and this will probably plug someone in, I apologize in advance, a lot of women who have manned up to such a degree that they are like it seems very celebrated to me for women to emasculate men and be better men than the men can be. And I see also a lot of soft men, and I really apologize if I'm like offending everyone here. I'm just gonna say it. But to me, I'm very confused by this. On the one hand, because I too celebrate each of us being our unique expression here, whether it's gender, sexuality, or however you want to live your life. I'm in support of you being you, however you want to do that. And like just on a physical body level, like what's going on with this? I mean, and I don't know if Chinese medicine, the whole yin yang, the way that you look at things, like, is there any explanation for that, or do I?
Yeah, well, so if you're constantly, so if you think about it too, like the way that physics works, right? We're constantly, there's two, I'm probably going to butcher this. There's two atoms and they're constantly looking to like just neutralize. You've got like a plus and a negative, and they're constantly dancing around each other, and they're attempting to neutralize. And then once you get to a neutral position, there's going to be a swing to the other direction, and we're going to end up like trying to neutralize again. So the constant of, you know, I find it fascinating too, the male female, it is kind of like that. It's kind of like we're attempting as a society perhaps, and maybe technology is contributing to this a lot, but there's an attempt to neutralize. There's an attempt to come back to like this one place where we're all equal. And that attempt to neutralize eventually swings in an opposite direction because it can't stay that way. Nothing stays the same ever.
Right, it's always in flux.
Right. So I think that what we might be seeing, because, and honestly too, I mean, you have a really great perspective because you have been on this planet at a really particular time. You were born and remember not having the kind of technology we have now. And then you can actively remember having the technology we have now. And so you're going to carry both those things with you forever. But you have, I mean, I have a little bit of it. I was born in 85, so I have a little bit of that sense, but really only when I was a kid. So, I mean, you have that sense of you have seen what the world is like without all this rapidity, if that's a word, this rapid state of movement. And as soon as all of this technology started, we're in this technology revolution. And as soon as all this starts, it just warp speeds. Everything is warp speed. So what you're seeing is probably the manifestation physically of a lot of that. And not only that, but we're putting a lot of really strange things into our bodies, and we're putting a lot of really strange things into the atmosphere and the environment. And I think we're going to see some really interesting effects. But when it comes to presentation, like how people decide to present, you know, you've got people, the sex revolution of, you know, women being present to orgasms and seeking pleasure. I mean, there's a lot of rewilding, and in that rewilding state, you're going to find all kinds of archetypes. Same with men. They're probably, you know, there's all kinds of archetypes coming out and moving and becoming more present because they're more socially accepted. And so I think we're just rapidly getting to this place where we're like, you know, straining to be at that one level with each other. And we're probably going to see a dissolution of that too, if we live long enough.
Right.
Make it there.
Fingers crossed.
Right. I know. I don't know. I have my doubts. I really have my doubts, but you know, we do what we can while we're alive just to stay.
Right.
Yeah.
Why we're here.
Why we're here. But yeah, it's really interesting that you noticed that. Especially physically, that you're noticing physically.
I mean, and I've wondered if cultural, like how much like our culture has actually shaped us in those directions, and if, for example, feminism has been a factor in that, because, you know, one of the pretty clear of feminism is sort of kind of like attacking men for being masculine, or either seeking to emasculate or not appreciate masculine traits, like pretty much vilifying masculine traits. And as a way, I don't know if that was as a way of like lifting female traits up or the feminine up, or to try it into some sort of like equality. I'm not quite sure what that is, but I've wondered as I mean, and especially watching like the recent violence in the past few weeks, I think there's some part of me that's been like, wow, you know, like this is a time when it's the perfect time for kind of like, without talking about toxic masculinity, there is a masculinity, like I feel like the true nature of masculinity is there to protect and to uplift and protect and kind of hold safety. And it's like, where has that gone? Have we culturally beaten that out of men and women and our own leaders? It's very interesting to watch for me.
Yeah, especially because you got to see it from the beginning, kind of.
I mean, it's definitely shifted. It's definitely shifted, and just kind of the volume's gone up. So
that's just it. The volume's gone up, and our eyes are more open, and we're more, you know, we're pushing for more acceptance, and all of those things are lovely. But with those things comes like an intense pendulum swing change. Yeah, it's fascinating, which is, I think, I'm also really interested to know why you don't like the word feminism, because I I also mentioned in that post the other day, and caught a lot of flack for it too, that I don't like the word patriarchy.
Oh, I hate that word now. I used to think it was like the cause of all evils in the world, but
exactly. Well, that's why I don't like it. That's why I don't like it. And it's not that it doesn't exist. I don't doubt its existence. It's and this fits into, you know, this whole equalizing conversation. It's like what is happening right now, and why do these words leave a bad taste in our mouths? But it's not necessarily that I don't like it. Or I'm sorry, it's not necessarily that I don't believe it. It's that I don't like the word, because what it does is suggest that there's an innate evil that is being forced upon us consciously by men.
right.
And I don't necessarily agree with that. And I don't think that we can really, like, if someone disagrees with my opinion, that's totally fine. And I think it's just the use of the word. There was at one time a patriarchal oppression that was placed on women and people of color and all that, and that's happened. That is something that is still, we're still living through the consequences of that. And I think that and this was the gist of my post, was basically like, we're not going to change that in our lifetime, but what we can do is work to change that in children. So, you know, planting seeds to change these things that we've inherited. But I think if a word takes us into this victim mentality,
Yeah.
we're just going to end up getting angry and blaming forever. And we're going to get lost in this wheel of blaming and shouting at each other.
Right. Yeah. Patriarchy. I really, I mean, you really summed it up why I don't love that word. I don't love the blaming. I just feel like because there are no solutions. I mean, and that's ultimately what I watched when I was in my schooling, was the only solution was pointing out the wrongs in a blame. There was never any solution beyond that. The solution was pointing out the things that are wrong. And that's exactly what I see happening now, whether it's on the BLM plan or on, you know, or on any of the other things, is that like the solution, like solutions need to be collaborative, and there's no way we're going to get ourselves out of like old boys network type of situation here in the world without learning how to bridge and work with rich white men that have traditionally been in positions of power. Like, to me, it's kind of like we just keep running into this cul-de-sac of the victimhood. So it's like, I'm a victim, I'm oppressed, you're the bad person. And there is no solution in that victim triangle. It's like, right. you can either be the victim, the perpetrator, or the savior. And which one? So you have a lot of people now virtue signaling, I'm the savior, I'm the savior, I'm the savior. And a lot of people like, we're the victims, whatever it is, whether it's, you know, I mean, it could be on gender lines, racial lines, biological sex line, whatever it is. And then you just have the people with the targets painted on their back, like, oh, like the reason for all of this is the patriarchy. And then you just insert, you know, the people that you think fit into that, that are the bad guys, so to speak. And it's not solution oriented.
And it's not that simple.
Right.
It's not that simple. And I think, you know, it just villainizing somebody because of how they look or the prestige that they have, it's not solution oriented. And I think that was just my point. And of course, that didn't sit well with a lot of people, which is fascinating. You know, that's really fascinating to me. It's kind of like, well, you know, this is an opinion I have, and this is, you know, from a viewpoint that, like, of working with lots of bodies, and, you know, and I feel this way and I express that, but does it make me a bad person for expressing an idea or a thought that in just a different manner. It's fascinating. And, you know, I think too, we have to pay attention to how that victimhood is showing up in our bodies. Because there we go right back around to like that internalizing nature that we have as women, to actually just be like, oh, but you know, I'm victim now. And so I can just stay in this little seed pod and not express and not use my masculine, not use my yang energy to get out there and to have the conversations and to be open to receiving other people's thoughts or ideas. You know, it's very, we have to make sure we don't get caught in those cycles. And, you know, how does it feel in your body to be caught in that victim mentality? You know, that's
huge. I mean, and it's one of the things I remember most from our teacher and mentor, Tammy Lynn Kent, from training with her, when she shared going in the day after 9/11 to treat, like, you know, she had a full day of clients treating after 9/11, and to feel the tension, like no matter what their history was before, they had all been viewing that imagery and being put fear trance of like, we're under attack, you're not safe. And I mean, our bodies respond so perfectly, especially our pelvis is so responsive and amazing, micro, you know, to the micro adjustments in our environment. And everyone was just completely like out of their body and totally locked down in fear with all these interesting tension patterns in the pelvic floor. And that, like, we're living in that now. And yeah, it's a really good question to ask. How do, and when we can't come to that neutrality inside of ourselves, and by regulating ourselves, we can't take right action. Like, we're only going to be reacting. I mean, we are animals. We have animal bodies, and we have these very busy brains in our animal bodies, which makes us think a whole lot of other things are important. But on a, you know, every animal is going to do what it needs to do to ensure its own survival. We have self-protective mechanisms, and regulating and learning to self-regulate so we can make right action it's huge. Huge.
Yeah. And I think the first, and you know, people are always, they're like, well, how do I learn to self-regulate? Does it have to involve somatic experiencing or whatever? And I'm like, look, you know, just pay attention to the minute responses of your body. You know, like what happens when someone says something you don't like, or when you see something on TV that, you know, like what happens? Like, pay attention to what your individual response is. Notice where you tense up. Notice, you know, like where, and it doesn't necessarily have to follow a prescription. It doesn't necessarily have to look a certain way. It can just be orienting towards that feeling of curiosity about, like, what does this thing make me feel?
Yeah. Curiosity is like one of the best tools there is.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed in recent weeks, there were a couple really like sniper, kind of angry sniper sort of messages that I received from people that maybe didn't appreciate my perspective. And it was fascinating because they were really like, I mean, serious whacks, not just like, oh, I didn't like what you said, but like, you know, really snipe attacks.
Yeah.
And I noticed, like, with one of them, like, it was like one line. It was something like, you're a fucking idiot or something. Like, I'll just say it. Sorry to blast your people.
Oh, no.
Listen, whatever it was. But it was like, just in when I read it, I was not anticipating it. And instantly, I mean, I noticed I had a full-on adrenalized response. My heart rate went up. I was tracking it in my body. I was like, wow, that's so interesting. Like watching what happens versus, a moment of seeing some good news, which there are good news stories out there, like, or hearing like some music that's really uplifting and noticing just like, oh, like where I can exhale and I can feel the tension like in my occiput dissolving. I can feel like, oh, my throat is like my jaw is unhinging and things like that. Just micro tracking those things gives us more ownership of our territory, the territory of our body, which will hold safety for us. This is where we make our own safety, is in our body, and we have a lot of ability to regulate there.
Yeah, I think too that it really helps us to come back to understanding where other people are coming from too. Like if I can feel in my body the response that I had to that, and I can say, like, this is a body response, and I wonder what their body is responding like. I mean,
Yeah.
when they saw what I wrote and they didn't like it, I wonder if they had a response like I just had, and if it's now we're just bouncing it back and forth. And do I really have to participate in that? I don't want to participate in bouncing this feeling of trigger, feeling of danger.
Right. Danger, trigger, and the world's not safe, and we're all out for each other. Yeah, I basically just love bombed them, which felt good to me. That's kind of how I roll, but I love an emoji love bomb if I can get it going.
Yeah, I've determined that there are a lot of people who aren't going to listen right now too, and as much as I was trying to get people to listen, I was like, what, I don't really have to get people to listen to my opinion, just like they don't have to listen to my, I don't have to listen to their opinion, and they don't have to listen to mine, but there's still something to be said for passing around appreciation, and people will still be looking for a fight, which is why I had to use the block feature the other day. I was like, okay, so we're not going to have a conversation. I've determined that because I tried with one of those people and it didn't go well. And I was like, I don't want to like shut down conversation. I hate that.
Yeah, right.
No one
but
wants
you can't argue with crazy. I mean, that's something I learned a long time ago, like really from dealing with people. I mean, and like behavior's crazy. Like I can really, like, I'm just such a like peace, love, and tofu person at heart that I can love all people and just really not appreciate their behavior and know like I can set a boundary with it and still love and appreciate them just from a distance, because I don't really feel like being smacked around or be their punching bag that day. And yeah, that's a life skill I just didn't have when I was in my 20s. I didn't have
Yeah. And that's the pendulum swing, right? Like you just kind of go back and forth until you find a nice place where you feel a center for you, and your body can confirm that, and just be in your center for you. I think that's a good message to cap this conversation.
Oh, I'm so glad we got to do this. Thank you.
Yeah, I am too. Thank you for being my first guest.
Happiness. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to do this for over a year, and I just don't know what was stopping me. I guess all this stuff, I was just like, okay, well, I guess it's time to talk.
Yeah, time to talk. Time to get the conversations going.
Yeah, with people who have opinions that, are more dynamic than the ones that I'm getting bombarded with, I feel.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like hashtag living is not, I mean, hashtags are hashtags, but there's a lot more than hashtags going on in the world that we need
to
eliminate, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And I'm part of hashtag living because of my business is all on Instagram.
Great. I love that you're doing so great.
Well, yeah. It's been a really weird year, trying to figure out how to balance like online stuff and then hands-on stuff, and it's gonna change.
Year ever, I think, so far for most.
So weird. I think I posted on a Facebook page yesterday. It was like a conscious community page. And I was like, does anyone have astrology predictions to the end of the world? I mean, year. And I was like honestly looking, and my first thought was, I wonder what the end of the world is going to look like. Isn't that in December or November?
Right.
No. Anyway, thank you for being here. And if you want to tell people how they can find you for hands-on work, you're in LA.
I'm in LA. Yep, I'm based in LA. Maybe I'll have you post just my website, which is my name, SuzanneSchiller.com.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I always talk to people ahead of time to see if we're a match, and if I can help you, I'm happy to. If not, I'll try to find another resource for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.